Hey, everybody. Welcome to Douglas Now's Beyond the Front Page with Robert Preston Jr. I am Robert Preston Jr. Got several, I think, interesting and pertinent things to talk about with you here today. Want to go over a few headlines from the past week, a couple of things we haven't talked about, a couple of things we have. We're going to finish this afternoon talking about the Tara Grinstead trial, which wrapped up on Monday. And I've got some thoughts on that. We're going to cover a little bit of sports. We're going to talk about a little bit of city government, crime and punishment, and then we'll wrap up with the Grinstead trial, which has captivated the state really since Tara Grinstead disappeared back in 2005. And I know everybody's kind of on sort of Grinstead burnout here over the last few weeks. But there's some interesting things I think that happened with that trial, and we can glean a lot about how investigations affect trials and also how juries look at evidence and give us a little bit of perspective, I think, on what happens in the courtroom. Because one thing I've noticed over the years is there nuances with when it comes to cases and charges and trials and all that. And a lot of times people simply look at charges or simply look at individuals too involved in these cases and don't always understand how we get the verdicts that we get. Also don't really understand exactly how, the various legal processes work in order to get to a conclusion. And again, we're talking about whether or not people get bond, things like that. So there are a lot of things that go into this, and we've got some big trials coming up here in Coffee County over probably the next 8 to 12 months, and I think we need to. And we've had some big ones in the past, the past year or so, and I think we need to look at how this stuff works to give us a perspective with what could potentially happen moving forward. So I think there's some lessons, some important lessons we can pick up from the Grinstead case, again, with regard to gathering evidence, investigations, and then all the way through the trial process. Monday night in Douglas, though, we're going to lead with the city commission. Monday night, there was a city commission meeting, and the meeting lasted just a few minutes. It was over with. The whole thing was over with by about 6:25. Now, there was a recognition for some of our recreation department track and field athletes who just wrapped their season and competed very, very favorably. We had a couple of state champions. We had one state record holder, I believe, in the I forget which event it was, but a young man won a state record or set a state record. And we had several individuals who did really, really well. Now, the city was going to recognize that track team at the meeting yesterday. Well, I said yesterday. This will air on Thursday, but it was on Monday. And only a couple of kids showed up. And I think what happened is some people got mixed up with when the meeting's going to start. Now, we've covered this and we've talked about this, but traditionally, city commission work session started at 6:00, and then the regular meeting started at 7. That's not the case anymore. The work session still starts at 6, but the regular meeting may not start at 7:00. It may start at 6:15. It may start at 6:20. It may start at 6:30. Anywhere after 6:00. If you followed the city commission, in the last couple of weeks, over the last couple of meetings, they've passed what they call the Bob Moore rule. And that was something that former Commissioner Moore wanted to do for a long time, for many years. He wanted to start the regular meeting as soon as the work session ended, maybe take a 5-minute break and then get started instead of having to wait till 6:00. The work session gets over with at 6:15, 6:20. You've got people standing around and waiting till 7:00 to begin. So I believe it was either the last meeting or the meeting before, the commission approved a resolution to start the regular meeting basically immediately after the work session. So again, it's sort of a fluid situation. Work session might get over with anywhere from 10 or 15 after 6 to sometimes it may go after 7, depending on what's on the agenda. But what you've got to do is if you're on the agenda, if you have some type of recognition, you need to be at the commission meeting at the chambers at 6 o'clock, because again, you don't know when the regular meeting is going to start. And I think that got some folks crossed up last night, but we're going to have more coverage on that as we get, more information with the records and who competed and who won what and all that. But it was really neat. And I think our city does a fantastic job of recognizing the kids in the recreation program. They understand how important the program is to our community, how important it is to the kids, and how, and the positive exposure that we get throughout the state because of our kids in the recreation program. So it was pretty neat to see. And I hope what they'll do is they'll give the kids an opportunity to come back at the next meeting and recognize the whole team, recognize all of the award winners. But again, if that is the case, you need to be there at 6 o'clock, because here lately, the commission meetings have not been lasting long at all. We used to have meetings that went hours. Work session start at 6. It might not get over with till 8 or 9. And now they're over with before 7. So again, you need to be ready. It's going to doesn't take very long at all. Everything went through on the agenda pretty calmly, with very little in the way of discussion, pretty cut and dried. We'll go over a few of these items. We're not going to go over all of them necessarily. We're going to go over a few of them. The first item on the agenda was the appointment to the Downtown Development Authority, and Jade Ogden was appointed to fill the unexpired term of Keishon Holmes. All right, Mr. Holmes is stepping down from the Downtown Development Authority, and Jade Ogden will step in and fill his unexpired term. There was also a petition to rezone a parcel of land. It was the first reading for this rezoning. At the next meeting, there'll be a second reading, a public hearing, and then the commission will vote. The individuals who filed for that petition, David Lott and Frank Lott, operating as Cashwell Properties, and the piece of property in question is at the corner of the Old Bell Lake Road and Southeast Bowens Mill Road. So there's some vacant property there, and it did not give an address because there hasn't been a building there for quite a while. There may not have ever been a building there, but I know recently there has not been a building there. So there was a petition to rezone that particular tract of property. If you have an interest in that, then you need to contact your commissioner and possibly attend the next meeting, where there will be, again, the second reading of that ordinance or that request, and then a public hearing and a vote. If you have a particular reason why that should not be rezoned, you'll have the opportunity to state your case during that public hearing. But again, that's on the intersection of the Old Bell Lake Road and Southeast Bowens Mill Road. I know that area very well. Many, many years ago, I used to live on the Old Bell Lake Road. It was the first house that I had after I got married. A couple of procedural things that the city did. They amended the elements for community facilities and services, and a resolution for the joint 2018 comprehensive short-term work plan and public hearing. Again, that's just some procedural stuff with the paperwork and the plans that the city has. Also adopted a revised service delivery strategy. So again, if you have any interest in how the city delivers its services, or anything regarding its community facilities and services, contact your commissioner. Go down to City Hall. Well, not City Hall, the makeshift City Hall, until which City Hall project should be finished here in the next few weeks. But go visit your commissioner, call your commissioner, go see the city manager, and you can take a look at a copy of that. Again, procedural stuff doesn't really affect anything in the grand scheme of things. City also approved the contractor for the 2017 Community Development Block Grant Mitigation for street drainage and mitigation improvements. That's a lot to say. There's a couple of areas of the city where we need to do some street work, some drainage and wetlands mitigation. This goes back to a part of the 2017 CDBG. We use that acronym quite a bit when we're talking about city business. That is Community Development Block Grant. And the contractor for that particular project is Griffin Grinding and Concrete out of Cordele. and the work is over on Jefferson Street and Fleetwood Circle. They were the low bid at just under 2.1 million, like $2.07 million on that. And they were the low bid by several $100,000. They also got another project here in the city, and that's the Sears and Leader Street projects. And what they're going to do over there, what the city plans to do there, is to align Sears Street and Leader Street. Also going to do a cul-de-sac at the end of Leader Street. That project is $100,045.54. Again, Griffin Grinding and Concrete of Cordele got both of those projects. City also discussed increasing the purchasing spending threshold on electrical transformers only to $100,000. That has to do with our ongoing supply chain issues. The fact that a lot of times when they need to buy this equipment, they need to buy it in a hurry, and they don't have time to bring it before the city commission and go through the approval process and all that. If there's a need, and if there's a transformer that's in bad shape, you need to get that transformer replaced and a new one put up as quickly as possible. So instead of having to wait and go through the city commission approval process, they raised that spending threshold to $100,000. So the utilities department can go ahead and get that and get those in place again. We're seeing some things happen on the supply chain side of things that we've never seen before when it comes to getting materials, parts, equipment. Anything that you need is very, very difficult to find right now. And when you're dealing again with our utilities and transformers and poles and things like that, if something's available, you need to be able to get it and get it in a hurry. You have to sit down and wait a couple of weeks to get it approved by the city commission. By the time that takes place, it probably won't be there. Also discuss a surplus and donation of used fire equipment. And that was from the fire department. Casey Wright brought that forward, and he's the fire chief, and Chief Wright said what it is it's turnout gear that they have to replace every so often. They're going to donate that to the Atkinson County Fire Department. He said the last time they sold that stuff at auction, they had all of the turnout gear that they had, the entire fire department's old turnout gear. You think of how many firemen we have, all of their old gear in one giant bundle that sold for $10. $10 is what they got for it. So instead of going through that process and trying to gather all that equipment up to get 10 or 15 or $20 at it, if we're dealing with the way inflation's working now, they might get $20 out of it instead of 10, but they're going to donate that to the Atkinson County Fire Department. They were interested in getting it. So the commission approved that. Also going to move date change for the June meeting, the second meeting in June, because the city will be, the commissioners will be at the GMA conference. Going to back that up a week to go ahead and get that taken care of. So can make sure we get the city's business handled in light of that conference. So again, if you have any business before the city commission at the second meeting in June, that meeting will change. They're going to back it up a week because of the conference that everyone will be at. So that was the city commission meeting in a nutshell. All right. Again, only took about 20 minutes, 25 minutes to do the whole thing. And we're seeing our commission run very efficiently right now. Not a lot of drama, not a lot of bad stuff going on. Remember, the best ticket in town a couple of years ago was our city commission meeting. It really was. And it was prior to COVID when we were still meeting over at City Hall, the old City Hall. That was the hottest ticket in town twice a month. Now, not so much. Things have calmed down, and the city's getting its business taken care of quickly and efficiently. And I think it's benefiting everybody. And I'm very happy. Well, again, we don't have the viewership maybe that we used to on our city commission meetings. We still do them live. You can tune in and watch them. And you can actually see what a commission meeting is supposed to look like. And I don't like staying around the meetings very long myself. I like getting them done, getting them out of there and getting home. I work all day long. I don't want to have to sit at a commission meeting all night. No matter how entertaining it can be. It's equal parts entertaining, equal parts disturbing. But the way it's been here lately, the county commission meetings have been lasting longer than the city meetings. We've had a few crime and punishment stories on Douglas Now. Again, check the Douglas Now Facebook page. You can check us out on Instagram. We're on Twitter, and we're also, of course, on Facebook. And we do have a website. A lot of people forget that we do have a standard, regular, old-fashioned website, DouglasNow.com. That's where you will see more of the long-form stories. So when we post stuff, some things are just posts on Facebook, others are links to stories. And you can click on those links and you can get the full report of our stories. And we've had several crime and punishment stories over the last couple of weeks. Now, some of you may have noticed that we're doing things a little bit differently. And this show, Beyond the Front Page, is a part of some of the different things that we're doing. But Kristen Kitchens has joined our staff. Very pleased to have her. She's doing a fantastic job. One of the things that Kristen loves is crime and punishment and following the courts and looking at cases and following stuff as it goes through the court system. I like that too. And we're not really good at following cases from arrest to resolution. We're really good about the arrest part. You get a headline and a mugshot and, kind of a sensational story, but a lot of times what develops after the arrest isn't what you expect. And there are a lot of folks who get arrested and a lot of folks who get charged with crimes of various kinds that the charges get dropped or they, plead to a lesser charge and may not even get any jail time. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to follow these stories through the court system and get reports on exactly how these cases are resolved. And we have a case that it goes back to February. We got one that goes back 3 years ago. We're going to talk about it here in just a second, but sort of the headliner of the headlines right now. We have a story, a couple of folks we've already had on Douglas Now before, allegedly involved in a heroin trafficking operation. Two young folks, engaged to be married, Skylar Merson and Alexandria Bowen. Both of them have been arrested and charged in the past. We covered those stories. They have been additionally charged, and we have an update to that story on Douglas Now as well. But again, in the past, we probably wouldn't have done a whole lot on that, and it doesn't really change the outcome much of where we are with regard to the case. They've been in jail since their arrest. Alexandria just a week or so ago, but Skylar's been in jail since February. They both remain in jail and are held without bond. An interesting case that I'm quite sure a lot of people have opinions on because of the nature of the charges. And when I first read it, I thought, really? And then after I dug a little deeper, I thought, well, I can see where they're going with this, but I think the court of public opinion is going to be against this case, and I understand why. But James Henry Young is facing trial, and by the time this airs, his trial will be resolved. His case will be taken care of. We don't have a resolution in it just yet, but we will by the time this airs. Take a look at Douglas Now. If you haven't seen it by now, you will be able to see what happens here. But James Henry Young was stopped in 2019 during a traffic stop. He had a very small amount of marijuana, less than an ounce, but he had officers found a gun in his car. Now, he was a convicted felon. He'd been convicted on prior charges and did have a felony record. So the big part about this particular case is not so much the marijuana, but the possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. And when people are looking at this story, what they're seeing is the marijuana. They're not necessarily seeing the weapons charge. And, you're going back 3 years pre-COVID, with a case like this, the court of public opinion is not going to be in favor of it. But I think the thing to keep in mind is that, certainly, and you look back from 3 years ago to where we are now. 3 years ago, 2019, marijuana wasn't looked at the same way that it is now. And I don't know how many years we could go back and look, but over the last, 10, 12 years, maybe more, maybe a little bit less. But the general opinion of marijuana use, marijuana possession has changed. Okay. At one time, people really hated it. It was really bad. Now, not so much. And you see, it's about 10 states. It's legal. It's legal, and it's probably headed for legalization throughout most of the country at some point over the next few years. Georgia is not one of those states, and Georgia seems to be sticking to its guns that it will not legalize the recreational use of marijuana. And maybe that's something we need to talk about moving forward. We need to devote some airtime to that. I definitely have some thoughts on it myself. But, 3 years ago, marijuana still wasn't quite as accepted as it is now. Now, completely different. Completely different. Anytime we put a story up about possession of marijuana, we might get 50 comments on it. And out of those 50 comments, probably 35 of them are, you ought to leave people who smoke marijuana alone. You ought to leave them alone. It's a wasted case. It's a waste of taxpayers' dollars to prosecute these cases. And I know a lot of police officers find themselves in a bad situation because they know they've got to make these arrests. They've got to charge these folks because it's against the law, but they also know that people aren't going to react very favorably and aren't really going to appreciate the work that they're doing when they make a marijuana case. But, but right after we posted this story, the comments were kind of leaning in that direction. Like, really, this is what we're going to trial over? Because, we've got we're going to have a jury trial on this in Superior Court. So that'll be interesting to see the resolution. Will it go to trial, or will there be a plea? And again, speaking of crime and punishment, another big story. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. There are a lot of moving parts, and I'm not exactly sure how this is going to fit in the overall big picture of this particular case. But last week, Justin Anderson's brother, and those of you who follow the Van Brown case, which is just about everybody, know that Justin Anderson is one of two individuals, Jeffrey Harper, the other one, charged with murder in the death of Van Brown. Jason Anderson, again, Justin's brother, was charged with murder last week, arrested, booked into the Coffee County Jail, and granted a $250,000 bond within hours of being arrested. That hasn't set well with a lot of people. And it does bring to light some interesting questions. And I can see both sides of it. Judges thinking, well, you've got two individuals already arrested. They got a bond. Now you've got somebody arrested almost a year after the others were arrested, and, hasn't been in jail, hasn't had any trouble, hasn't had any problems, been in trouble at all since Mr. Brown's death. So do you keep somebody in jail, or do you give them bond, particularly when the other two defendants have already been given a bond? But I think it's also kind of odd when someone gets a bond on a murder charge and walks out of jail immediately. That brings to light a lot of questions that are difficult to answer. And no matter how good someone thinks they're answering it, people aren't going to buy it. And this happened immediately. Initially, when Miss Bowen was charged, again, we just talked about her, she was arrested and charged last week, denied bond. A couple of days later, we have the story about Mr. Anderson's arrest on murder charges, malice murder, and he gets a bond, but you've got Miss Bowen sitting in jail without a bond. And not just her, but others. There are plenty of other individuals who are arrested on far less serious charges than murder who are sitting in jail and don't get a bond. So I know what the judges are thinking, and they're not necessarily wrong in their line of thinking. But once again, in the court of public opinion, it looks bad, and it's in some ways it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain and hard to accept. I've never seen it in my life. I have seen people get charged with murder and get bonds before. I've seen that happen. I think this incident with the Brown case with the other two defendants is the third time in my lifetime that I have seen individuals charged with murder get bonds. What's interesting is that in each of the other two cases, the defendants were not convicted. One was acquitted at trial. The other one had charges dropped before trial. Charges were dismissed. So nobody who's ever gotten a bond on a murder charge during my lifetime has gotten convicted. Now, again, I don't know what that means with regard to this case. Each case is individual, and get in a little bit of trouble sometimes when you start trying to draw too many conclusions. But that is kind of interesting that, and, you know, and I turned 50 this year. I don't really know what happened much before 1990, but my father does. I've talked to him and he can't remember it. So during my lifetime, as best as I can recall, there have only been 3 instances, now fourth, of individuals charged with murder getting bonds, and nobody who has been charged with murder who got a bond has been convicted of that crime. But that, you know, of course, everybody, I was about to say that's going to be a case to watch, but I don't have to say that. Everybody's going to be watching that case, and there is no trial date set. Don't have anything set out for the progression of that case through the court system. Okay. So I'm still waiting. I know we're going to have a murder trial this summer. It is not going to be in this particular case. So you've got at least one murder trial before we get to the Brown case, and not exactly sure that it'll be after that. We'll just have to wait and see. On the sports note, preseason scrimmage, football scrimmage, last Saturday night, the Coffee Trojans played the Brooks County Trojans. They're the defending state champions in their classification. Brooks County has an unbelievable team. Their head coach, Maurice Freeman, is an unbelievable coach, unbelievable man, fantastic guy. I had the opportunity to talk to him regularly several years ago when I was doing some freelance magazine work. Unbelievable motivator. I really think a lot of Coach Freeman, and they've had a really good team and should have won state championship before now. And I don't say that against their team, but they've had state championship caliber teams many, many times in the past. And for whatever reason, you know, what has to happen for you to win a state championship? There are a lot of things that have to go your way. And if one thing goes against you, then that can cost you a championship. But really, when you look at any classification in the state, there's only a handful of teams, 3-4 teams that have a chance of winning a state championship. I mean, really, that's the fact of the matter. You know, you talk to any high school student, any high school football player before the season starts, what's your goal? Our goal is to win a state championship. Well, more than likely, it's not going to happen. You know, the classifications we've got, they're only going to be one in each classification, but out of each classification, there's probably about 4 teams that have a realistic, legitimate shot of winning a state championship. But Brooks County is one of those teams year in and year out. They're always a state champion contender. So even though they're a smaller school, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a pushover. And the Trojans, the Coffee Trojans, saw that on Saturday night. We scored a defensive touchdown, 2 offensive touchdowns. They scored 3 offensive touchdowns. And let me tell you, our defensive touchdown, listen, there's not a better play in football than a big guy touchdown. All right. And B.J. Reed, defensive lineman B.J. Reed, scored one for us on Saturday night. He blocked the pass. And caught it. And, of course, there's nobody between him and the end zone. They were deep in their territory. Nobody between him and the end zone but the quarterback. And the quarterback is not bringing down number 75. He's not going to do it. So Reed deflected the pass, caught it, scored a touchdown. The sidelines went nuts. The stands weren't full, but there was a good crowd there. But everybody went nuts. It was fantastic. I mean, it really, really was. That's always fun to watch. But that was our first touchdown. They played under modified rules. What they did was the first quarter, the junior varsity teams played. Second, third, and fourth quarters, the varsity teams played. So we actually won the first quarter 14-0. Then beginning in the second quarter, they reset the clock and brought the varsity teams out. And they didn't contest special teams, kickoffs. You know, there were kickoffs, there were punts, there were field goals, there were extra points, but nobody rushed. Nobody really tackled. I mean, they didn't want anybody getting hurt on a special teams play. So it was a modified game. And with 4 seconds left, Brooks County was inside the 10-yard line, inside our 10. Game was tied 21-21, and they opted to kick a field goal and, kick the field goal. It went through. Time expired. But again, there was no rush, couldn't try to block it. And when you're dealing with punts and kickoffs throughout the game, a lot of things can happen. So in the modified game, we lost 24-21. This was our first competitive event, game, whatever, under our new head coach, Mike Coe. And listen, they'd practiced for 2 weeks, 10 days, all we had practiced. So I don't know that you can glean a whole lot from this particular game. It was fun to see. I know the kids were ready to hit somebody besides each other. And I think as we move forward through the summer, we're going to see a really, really solid football team come August. And August isn't that far away. I mean, we're at the end of May. School's out right now. This is the eve of the last day of school as we're taping this. So when this comes out, school's over with. The summer's begun. The summer, I know the first day of summer officially was back, several weeks ago. But as far as most parents are concerned, summer begins when school gets out. So, when you're watching this, school is out, summer's begun. So we're going to have really 2 months of summer workouts. Then we're going to really get into the preseason stuff, the real preseason stuff. And then we'll see where we're at from there. But I think we're going to have a good football team. I think it's going to be fun to watch and going to be neat to see our kids out there on Friday night. Look, you think about it, most of the time, year in and year out, the largest groups are gathered at Jardine Stadium. That's the largest gathering in our community at one single time. That's the biggest ticket in town. Doesn't matter if there's a concert, as fun as the concerts at the Martin Center are. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a concert, if you're talking about a community church service. There's not a larger group that gathers at any time during the year than those 5 home football games that we have each fall. That's the largest crowd. That's the biggest ticket in town. It's fun to watch our kids play in front of the largest stage. I want to wrap up real quickly. Again, I just want to mention a couple of things over the last couple of minutes on the Grinstead case. The Grinstead case was a mess. It was a mess from the start. And you look at how investigations go, and I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it because I've seen this happen in other cases. What I think the investigators did was they started at the end and began working backwards. And what I mean by that is that they already had an idea or picked, if you will, a suspect, and then began working from that suspect back to see how the circumstances and how the evidence fit the narrative to go after this one particular individual who was not involved. The crazy thing about all this is that the exact same information that came out in court has come out in the last 5 years since Ryan Duke confessed in 2017. Investigators had that information back just a few weeks or so after Tara disappeared, but they didn't believe it. They sort of haphazardly followed up on it, and they dismissed it as a couple of drunk kids mouthing off at a party. Okay. That wasn't what was going on. It was a couple of drunk kids, yes, but a couple of drunk kids with guilty consciences talking about what happened. But it got dismissed. And the reason I think it got dismissed because it didn't fit the predetermined narrative that investigators had. All right. They had all this information, and it went on for 12 years before one of the individuals implicated in that information came forward and confessed. And, you think it should have been a cut and dried case if someone confessed. You take a look here, though. The jury had all the evidence. The jury had way more information than any of us have. But I think it's I don't think I'm out of line by saying that the jury really didn't look at the evidence. They didn't pass their verdict based on the evidence. The only evidence they really had was Ryan's confession. And of course, Ryan came back and recanted his confession. He said, "No, that's not true. I just confessed because I was scared of Bo Dukes." It's always kind of weird. Always, you've got Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes, no relation, one with an S on the name, the other one without, but no relation at all. But they're the individuals involved in this particular incident. And most people would agree that Bo is not a nice person. And in the court of public opinion, it swung against Bo. Most people, I think, again, I think this is a pretty safe statement to make. Most people believe that Bo was the one who actually took Tara's life. Thing is, there's no evidence to suggest that. There's no evidence against Bo. Ryan confessed. Then he changed his story and said, no, you know what? Actually, Bo's the one who did it. I confessed because I was scared of him. All right. Now, that may make sense. That may make sense to some people. It certainly made sense to the jurors. That's the way they went. And they reached that verdict pretty quickly. Didn't take long to reach a verdict in this case. The jury got the trial on Thursday and had a verdict before lunch on Friday. They were pretty certain in their verdict. All right. Interesting thing is, though, the evidence of the case doesn't suggest that that's what happened. And this is another one of those lessons that you just don't know what a jury's going to do. You just don't know how an investigation unfolds, how that happens affects the jury, how investigators, how attorneys, district attorneys, how it all goes into one. This is a very, very interesting trial. It's also a very troubling trial. Okay. Because what's going to happen here is I think it's fairly safe to say, or I think it's very safe to say, that these are the two individuals who were involved in Tara Grinstead's murder. One of them was acquitted. There's no evidence against the other one. There aren't going to be any charges brought against Bo Dukes. None. Okay. If you think that Bo did it, he's never going to go to trial for it. Now, Bo has his own problems. He's in jail for lying in this particular case. And your prosecution has a problem if their star witness is in fact sitting in jail because he lied in this case. That doesn't pave the way for a very good prosecution. But there's no evidence that Bo killed Tara Grinstead. The only evidence that Ryan Duke killed Tara Grinstead is his confession, which he admitted it. He said he did it. Now, I know there are false confessions. There's a lot of science behind false confessions, and psychologists and psychiatrists and investigators have studied false confessions for years, decades, and they're going to continue to investigate these and continue to talk about it and write books about it. And there are instances when false confessions happen. Is this a case of a false confession, or has Ryan just had time to rethink his future and decided that he wanted to throw the blame on somebody else? I don't know. But what I believe we do is we have a system in place and we put the facts of the case in front of those in charge of making a decision. And once they make it, we accept it. So whether we believe it or not, we weren't on the jury, we have to accept it. But it's interesting. I've talked to people on both sides, people who think that Ryan was guilty and folks who think he was innocent. But in all of this, you can't lose sight of the fact that there's going to be no justice for the Grinstead family. There might be a smidgen of justice, again, with the problems that Bo has, if he's convicted on the other charges that he has, which are sexual assault and some other stuff. He could conceivably spend the rest of his life or most of the rest of his life in jail. Ryan Duke is going to spend the next 5 years in prison, assuming he doesn't get parole. He did admit to concealing the death of another person. Maximum sentence for that is 10 years. He has served 5 years, so he's going to serve. He was sentenced to serve the remaining 5 years of that sentence in prison. Now, he is eligible for parole. He's been in jail long enough to be eligible for parole. And when people see that someone is eligible for parole, they automatically think it means that they're going to get paroled. That's not necessarily the case at all. It just means you're eligible for parole. I would imagine in Ryan Duke's case, he will not get paroled. He will serve the remainder of his sentence, but he'll still be out of jail in 5 years. The longest he's going to stay in jail, unless he does something bad while he's in jail, is 5 more years. All right. So the only conviction related to Tara's death is a 10-year sentence. That's it, a 10-year sentence. So once again, you've got you've got a family that's not going to get justice. And it's just, and you have to go back and look at how this investigation unfolded. And they had more information. The Grinstead file is the largest file in the history of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. It is the most comprehensive case file that there is. If you want to see a copy of it, you can. If you submit an open records request, they can give it to you because it's closed. It's closed now. Case is over with. I don't know what they're going to charge you for it. I imagine you're looking at thousands and thousands of dollars, maybe even 5 figures if you want that case file. But you could get it now. Now again, that's if it's all in paper. I guess they could burn CDs and do things like that. But even if you do that, people have to go through and redact a lot of information, and it's going to be very expensive. I would not imagine that anybody would get that. Maybe some big news outlet with deep pockets might want to go for it. But it was just a mess from the start. And you got to figure in a little town like Ocilla, how did this happen where there's really no evidence? And what little bit of evidence there is, the jury completely ignored. Jury completely ignored it. If they didn't, if they went on the evidence, Ryan would have been convicted. All right. Which, of course, brings you to the only two logical conclusions: is either the jury made a mistake, or Ryan did in fact falsely confess. Don't know. Doesn't matter. We'll leave that to people who are smarter than me to analyze this particular verdict moving forward, because I believe that people will. But I think that it says a lot about some of the cases that we have outstanding. I think it says a lot about where a lot of our district attorney's offices in our area might go with cases. Okay. And you also need to realize that it does not mean that any case is a slam dunk. All right. Juries can do unusual things. There was one piece of evidence, one big piece of evidence in this case, and the jury did not accept that as evidence. So, human nature, whatever. But that's the way it went. I had someone ask me a question yesterday, made a post on our Facebook page. So, who is going to jail for the murder of Tara Grinstead? And the answer is nobody. Nobody is going to jail for the murder of Tara Grinstead. Someone is going to jail on charges related to her murder, but not for her murder itself. And that means that no jury, there's no such thing as a slam dunk. No such thing as a slam dunk. And that does cause a little bit of concern for me and gives me a lot of question marks with some of the cases that we've got moving forward. Thank you guys for watching. We appreciate it. A lot of ground we covered tonight. We're going to continue to work on bringing you quality content on this particular platform. We're going to get some guests in here. We're going to talk about some other aspects of life in a small town, particularly with regard to crime and punishment and how things get done here. It's kind of interesting. We live in a very small community. A lot of crazy stuff has gone on and continues to go on, and we're going to talk about it. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next week. You've been watching Beyond the Front Page with Robert Preston Jr. of DouglasNow.com. We'll see you next week.